So what I want to talk about is the reinsertion of our victorious dissidents into our own Western institutions. Now, many of you have seen the situation in which we've seen high-profile academics flee the institutions to which they're associated. You would think these would be our star professors, the people who we find most admirable, the great role models for our next generation. And what has happened is that many of them have left the academy never to return. We have not reinserted these people, and certainly we haven't reinserted them with chaired professorships. They cost about $5 to $15 million, so a rich person could definitely cause a lot of trouble with one of our leading universities in the States just by endowing chairs, and yet nobody seems to be doing this. So the question that I have is, we won, didn't we? I mean, this was an incredibly silly use of everyone's time, where we're still debating grooming gangs and whether or not men can be women. We stood up. And so, what exactly happened in this situation? And then we have to ask the question, why are we still not able to reinsert our own champions into the systems that we would have thought we were associated with? I would have thought that Cambridge and Oxford in the UK would be the places which would be in the forefront of reabsorbing the people who had the courage of their convictions to stand tall and make sense when it was extremely dangerous to do so. Why are our dissidents who stood up not now rewarded? An incentive structure works in the business sector whereby you do the right thing, you become wealthy, you get to reinvest, you become an allocator, and that way we get more of the good things that work. And yet what we see here is that it is not our top experts who are going to be making more experts. Using the old concept, the German Doktorvater, you are essentially trying to leave more of yourself if you're successful. And lastly, why are we leaving this task incomplete? It seems to me like we're on a tremendous roll. You can see how successful ARC is, and yet we're not holding this in some of the bastions that I would have associated with Western civilization. We're here in an event venue. So what is stopping this? We cannot rescue Western civilization, in my opinion, until we once again become it. And you can't become Western civilization if your leading dissident thinkers are lying outside of the citadels in which we have traditionally protected them so that they could inflict the maximal damage on bad ideas. So Western civilization is about Western institutions being able to recognize quality and to promote it. In particular, the UK is the world's leading collector of eccentrics. And eccentrics move the world. That's why a Jim Watson or a Jimi Hendrix has to come from the US to the UK to be recognized, and then you guys send him back, which is one of the greatest things that the UK does for the US. These are recent heroes of our last 100 years. I don't know how many of you recognize the woman being given a medal by John F. Kennedy, but that is Frances Oldham Kelsey, who made sure that the US was not filled with flipper babies when the case for thalidomide for pregnant women could not be made. One woman standing courageously against an entire industry, standing firm from the University of Chicago, staring them down and protecting the entire country. That kind of highly agentic, individualistic, and keep in mind, a woman in the early 60s. You'll notice in the photograph, which is about to turn 100, below that, a group of people who essentially all get Nobel Prizes, and there's only one woman in that photograph. Of course, she's the only one who gets 2 Nobel Prizes. Where would these people be in the age of Fauci? My claim to you is that they would be out of work, they'd be disgraced, they would be called charlatans, they would be called grifters, they would be called self-promoters, they would be called malcontents. How do we get those horrible people back into the system? This is the part of irresponsible citizenship that I'm here to extol the virtues of. Our covert operations community seems to have had a huge shift around, I would say, 1969, when the MIT physics department walked out and said we were protesting the Vietnam War, many of them being Manhattan Project veterans. And what I believe happened in large measure is that our covert operations community, which we can't see into, comes up with terrible narratives. And these terrible narratives can't be contradicted. And if there's one thing good scientists and great scientists excel at, it's blowing up terrible narratives. So whether it's the wet market origin of COVID or the idea that a highly complicated system like cloud formation world weather patterns is modeled as settled silence. These things are obviously nonsense, but somehow we can't get rid of a community we can't even see interfering in our ability to find ground truth. The intelligence community is not the intelligence community. It is gathering intelligence, but it also hides a different group called covert operations. Covert means deniable. That means gaslighting. That means if you find out about the operation, we're authorized to lie to destroy that person in order to protect state secrets. 77 US Nobel laureates somehow miraculously signed some article protecting the EcoHealth Alliance run by a bizarre Ukrainian zoologist in the US who should not have been funding what appears to be bioweapons research in a Chinese lab. But yet 77 of these people with no domain expertise, many of them like particle physicists, were suddenly jumping to the aid of this strange program. If you wait a little bit longer, you start to see articles in sort of second or third tier publications saying that the CIA tried to bury the narrative that said, quite likely, the COVID virus, which may have killed, say, north of 10 million people worldwide, may have been a US, let's say North Carolina-based project being run out of a Chinese lab. And if you look at where the funding comes from, the USAID slush fund for the CIA, and I highly recommend the work of Mike Benz, who I'm in regular conversation with, is one of the, thank you, sir, one of the major funders of this bizarre, highly overpowered, tiny hippy-dippy community focused on something called One Health. This is just an example of having to wait for the obvious, which is you don't take a good explanation like a lab leak off the table. This is not part of science. Any scientist should be able to tell you that, and any scientist who did tell you that is out of work. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is a terrible principle. We should rid ourselves of the skeptic movement. Science knows how to do skepticism. We don't need somebody cloaking the covert operations community. You never get the evidence by design because clandestine means secret and covert means deniable. So if you're always recommending that that should be the standard, you'll never be able to prove anything. Just like not only does correlation not imply causation, nothing seems to imply causation. So Epstein, in particular, was a crazy story that is almost certainly a covert operations hub. And he told me in 2004 exactly what the nature of his business was when he offered me partnership. He claimed he had an FX hedge fund, multi-billion dollars under management. It's impossible to make trades on that size without moving the market, which means you're leaving a data trail a mile wide. He claimed that it was subdivided into 3 strategies, and that the FX hedge fund was staffed only by a trading floor of hundreds of Brooklyn yeshiva brokers because they were the only people he could trust. Now, this is highly specific information, including the fact that he had 2 trading floors. One at Villard House on Madison Avenue on the 4th floor where he asked me to deliver material, and the other on a specially outfitted Boeing 727. You cannot have this level of detail and not get hoisted on your own petard because the entire story was nonsense. None of this survived scrutiny. All challenges were destroyed by my arguments. There was no traction on this, not at the level of journalists. Journalists found the story fascinating, but the editors continuously spiked it, which tells us that the way in which our covert operations group is working is that it's specifically dealing with the editors rather than the journalists. The journalists can be trusted, the editors cannot. In fact, the journalists don't even know that there is such a mechanism. On June 16th of 2026, the New York Times started to publish notes from Jeffrey Epstein's last moments, assuming that he is in fact dead, because I have no knowledge one way or the other. And at the bottom, you see in his own handwriting, never was a hedge fund manager. That took 22 years of my life to make that one stupid point over and over again on every podcast in America at scale with nobody following up on it. This is completely crazy-making behavior. Obviously, he wasn't a hedge fund manager, and nobody pointed this out. What's more, I was the only person to point out that he appeared to relish having an American flag as some sort of a desecration altar which couldn't be missed by anyone, because who puts an American flag which isn't to be soiled as a tablecloth on a very long table? Now, obviously, I was crazy. That's not something that would go unnoticed if people saw it, right? I mean, red and white stripes, it would be unmissable. And then suddenly, here's this photograph of a fellow I seem to recognize from somewhere, hovering over what appears to be a female child. This was a state-sponsored operation. It wasn't a weirdo, it wasn't a pedophile. This was a program. This was constructed. And I've been saying that for 22 years, and we can't even still say that without that seeming like a controversial statement. So let me double down. Epstein, COVID, Wuhan Institute of Virology, EcoHealth, high immigration policies that absolutely nobody wanted, where it was claimed that there was no downside to immigration. It was the rarest thing in all of economics, a pure free lunch. These were all clandestine covert operations, and I can give you varying degrees of support for all of them. But the fact is, we still have to argue this, and by virtue of the fact that all of these things have to be argued means we never get to the 5th, 6th, 7th stages of the conversation. It's forever Groundhog Day, and we're always saying, why is it that you believe that any of these things were covert operations? Because, of course, extraordinary claims require extraordinary blah, 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 blah. Duh, we have enough proof. We have to get on with things. Those of you who have children will eventually realize that why is an infinite series of questions to avoid bedtime. So when the founding fathers of the United States of America had to secede from this beautiful land that we find ourselves in here, what kind of argument did they make? It rested on 2 boxes there in the Declaration of Independence. Can I ask you to thunder back? We hold these truths to be that all men are endowed. Okay, 2 recourses to we are not having this discussion. The Creator endowed it, and this is self-evident, and we are getting on with things because otherwise it's not going to be a declaration. It's going to be a 12-volume set, and it's going to invite the question, why? So, our society rests not on debating everything to death, but whatever we hold to be self-evident, whatever is axiomatic to who we are, we do not debate with scoundrels. We do not debate with those who would seek to kill us. We do not accommodate them by giving them a platform with which to tie us in knots. And my claim is that this is counter to many of our intuitions. I'm not saying to do this with most things, but when it comes to whether we are a free people, whether we are a pluralistic society, and whether the Enlightenment is a good idea or not, that is definitional for us. We should not be debating these points with the woke, with totalizing ideologies, communism, radical Islam, doesn't matter. We have to get beyond this impulse and say, no, this is us, this is what we do, this is what we're about, this is what we fight for, this is what we're willing to die for, and in rare occasions like World War II, this is what we are willing to kill for. The singular task of our time in the West is the restoration of a compelling, indefinite human future. Now, what I've done in this slide is to show you how every word bears weight. In particular, what I would like to say is that for it to be indefinite, we have to spread out to the largest number of atmospheres possible, because the weapons that we have come up with, the technologies, are unfortunately atmospherically mediated. There are only 3 possible two marginal and 1 beautiful surfaces in this solar system. Our solar system is an escape room, an escape womb, if you will, with 3 surfaces. And we have been at term for this pregnancy since 1952 with the explosion of the hydrogen device. It is imperative that we start working on this problem. And I work on 2 main projects. I wanted to tell you about the ability to go beyond general relativity. But what I wanted to say is that not only do we have to do that, we have to be able to give talks and to confer with colleagues inside of the university system. It turns out that it is harder to give normal talks inside of a university than it is to work on the problem of going beyond Einstein. It's very strange, because there's a grand narrative that there's only one way of doing things. It's called string theory, and supposedly it's the only game in town, a lie told for 42 years without contradiction. These third rail narratives are all such that they would not have survived before 1970. And just to tell you what it is really like, I have been giving talks in physics departments for ages, and I have to erase the talks that I give in order to continue this arrangement. So on this slide, I'm giving you 4 recent talks I've given on dark energy, on post-relativistic physics. And I've provided slides across from each one to show you that they actually happen. And in each case, I'm told you are a visitor who is not a visitor. It is a talk which is not a talk. You may not use this in any publication. And if I sneak a talk onto the agenda, somebody calls ahead to the university to warn them that a Harvard mathematical physics PhD is going to give a talk on mathematical physics. This is a situation that many of you are unaware of. It's completely insane. It makes me look crazy even talking about it, but my point is there's enough specificity on that slide to prove to you that it is most likely the case that I am, in fact, not crazy, and what you are looking at is an insane system. So this is the last slide. The culture war was a proxy war. It wasn't the real war. The real war was about institutional narratives and people who shouldn't be writing them because they're not very good at it, being terrified of the experts who are completely capable of picking these things apart and to save the public a great deal of agony and even death in the case of something like COVID. So consider the culture war won. The final battle is against the forces that keep us from reinserting the dissidents that we have fought so hard for, like Dr. Jordan Peterson and others. And what we now need to do is to get our journalists, our experts, our theorists back into the classroom, back into the newspapers, back into the BBC. It's not good enough to create parallel institutions. We have to become the West all over again. We have to finish the job. We're almost there. Thank you for your time.